Hello, and welcome to the Banff at Altitude podcast, celebrating 50 years of adventure storytelling from the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival. Since its beginning in 1976, the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival has been a gathering place in celebration of all things mountain culture. The yearly festival, hosted at Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, fosters an appreciation of the world's mountain places by creating opportunities for people to share and find inspiration in mountain experiences, ideas, and visions. Over the years, we've spoken to hundreds of incredible adventurers who share their spectacular and moving stories. My name is Joanna Croston, and I'm going to be digging through our festival archives to revive some of our favorite presentations from the past to get you stoked for what's to come in 2025, our 50th anniversary. And well, hopefully you'll be stoked for life in general. In continuing with this tradition of sharing stories and connections, we hope this podcast will inspire you to explore, preserve, and enjoy the great outdoors. As a physician and pioneer climber, Dr. Tom Hornbein combined his love of mountains and medicine to shape an illustrious career. He spent his life examining the physiological effects of high altitude on the body. He made first ascents in his native U.S. and in the Himalaya, most notably the West Ridge of Mount Everest in 1963. As an author, he wrote Medicine for Mountaineering and the West Ridge, and remained actively involved with the University of Colorado's Altitude Research Center and Foundation well into his 80s. Hornbein joined us in Banff on many occasions over the years, and this is the 2013 Voices of Adventure interview with Geoff Powter. Enjoy.
You know, when I sit up here, I always think of myself as probably the luckiest person in the world, and that's especially true today. In 2000, it was the 25th anniversary of the festival. The festival was really large that year. There were a lot of things going on, and there were concurrent sessions happening. And I missed what was probably one of the best events that has ever happened at this festival. Because it was concurrent, you had to make a choice of which event to go to, and for some godforsaken reason, I ended up going to a panel discussion on grading of ice climbs. all I can remember was people saying things like, it can't be a grade 8, there can't be a grade 8, it must be 7+. So I listened to that for 45 minutes and then came out into the hallway and found out that next door there had been this absolutely amazing event discussing the nature of heroes and mentors and inspirations in climbing. When I went out into the hallway, people were just buzzing about this, some of them actually in tears, and I don't think I'd really seen that often at the festival. What I was hearing was particularly that been one person who had said some remarkable things, and people continued to use that word about Tom Hornbein for the rest of the festival that year, that he was simply remarkable in the way that he was thinking, in the support he was giving people, in the intelligence that he showed, in the way that he had understood climbing. But he's that in so many other ways as well. I'm sorry if I have to read this out, you'll understand why in a minute. There's such a long list of things that Tom has done. I talked to colleagues of Tom's, and they described him as a physician of remarkable compassion and ability. In our world, we make heroes of climbers who have saved one individual, but let's be realistic. Tom has saved literally hundreds of lives. He's an honored educator. He was chairman of the Department of Anesthesiology at the University of Washington School of Medicine for decades. He's the recipient of the Distinguished Teaching Award from the University of Washington School of Medicine. He delivered the 4th annual Ernest O. Henschel Memorial Lectureship and delivered the prestigious Rovenstein Lecture at the American Society of Anesthesiologists. In 1991, he was made a Fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science. Tom is also a distinguished researcher with over 80 academic papers behind him. He was the editor of the Journal of American Physiological Society from 1967 to 1973, the associate editor of Anesthesiology from 1989 to 1991, and he continues to sit on the editorial board of the Journal of Applied Physiology. Closer to our world, Tom has forever been one of the foremost thinkers and writers on hypoxia and the effects of altitude. His book, High Altitude, An Exploration of Human Adaptation, remains a Bible of human physiology. And then there have been those climbs, and in particular, that one climb. On May 22nd, 1963, Tom and his beloved partner, Willie Unseld, summited Everest via the unclimbed West Ridge and then descended down the other side of the mountain, bivouacking in the open above 28,000 feet. Reinhold Messner called their climb the bravest and best climb of that mountain ever. Tom and Willie were just the 11th and 12th people to the top of the world. When he returned, Tom completed one of the great classics of mountain writing, Everest, the West Ridge. Tom has had a lifetime of recognition for both his climbs and his contributions to mountain culture. He is a recipient of the prestigious Hubbard Medal from the National Geographic Society. He was an honorary member of the Appalachian Mountain Club, the American Alpine Club, the Alpine Club, the Mountaineers, and the China Association for Scientific Expeditions. And at 82, Tom is still exploring. He's teaching himself to play Mozart and Bach on the piano. He's still at the forefront of thinking about altitude. He's still mentoring young climbers. And he's still out there bashing and thrashing, following his much younger friends in their 50s up 5'9". He's still all the things that he talked about back in 2000, a mentor, an inspiration, and to many people here today, me included, a hero. Tom Hornbein. Now, one of the things that you've been saying to me over the past little while is that you'd prefer not to talk about Everest, but I think we're probably going to end up going there a few times during the day, if that's okay with you.
I guess that I have to live with the sins of my past.
I want to begin kind of at, maybe not the beginning of that trip, but an important midpoint for you, and that was on February 22nd, 1963, you stepped on a plane, headed for Asia, and you started writing a letter. What did you write in the letter that you wrote home?
I don't know.
You promised you weren't going to do this to me.
Is it in the book?
No, it's not in the book, actually. Yeah.
Then I really don't know. I can't answer. I mean, I don't know. All I know is how I felt sitting on that plane. And I'm sure for many of you who have been through these same experiences, it's not a unique experience, which is the pain of parting. From my then wife and 5 kids, seems like a crazy thing to be going off to climb Everest. You know, it was, for a brief moment, just that sense of the doors closing, the plane leaving its parking spot and taxiing, and you just stop for a moment and think, what in the hell am I doing? And then the plane leaves the ground and it's like a switch flips. Suddenly you're in forward, and that part that you've left behind is not gone by any means. It was a constant throughout the expedition, partly of just wanting to get the damn thing climbed and go home to my family. At the same time, you're totally focused on what's in front of you because it's pretty absorbing. And then you come back to reality eventually.
Fear at that point?
Fear? No, I think I was too stupid for that. Yeah, I'd been to the Himalaya for my first time to the Karakoram in 1960 on Masherbrum with Willie and Dick Emerson. And we had agreed that we knew this was going to be a big expedition, but if we all went as a trio, it would be a hell of a lot of fun to be part of this thing. But on Masherbrum, a lot of the uncertainties about how you would do at high altitude or how I would do at altitude had been pretty well resolved. And I had this maybe not rational feeling that if I didn't get sick, I was going to be fine in managing at least the altitude of Everest, which of course is its most unique element.
I'm fascinated by the arc for you compared to some other people who've sat up here in the chair that you're in right now, from early childhood to eventually ending up in mountain. For a number of other people, they had parents that introduced them to the mountains. They had early experiences, either living near the mountains or thinking of them really clearly, that you can kind of see how people ended up on Mount Everest or on Masherbrum. For you, it's kind of a different story. One of the things that I should mention is that if there's one probably really shortest book in all of mountain history telling, it would probably be Famous Jewish Mountaineers. There aren't too many people in there. I think it's probably maybe you and Moses, and that's about it.
I think Geoff Tabin belongs there.
Oh, Geoff Tabin. Mountains weren't part of your background. They weren't part of your early story. Can you talk a little bit about some of your roots and how you ended up in the mountains?
I can remember as a kid growing up in St. Louis, just climbing on houses, our house. I had a lot of roots on our house, and trees. And for reasons that I never got around to really asking my parents until after it was too late and I couldn't, when I was 13, they sent me to a camp very near where we're living in Estes Park now.
In Colorado.
And I met mountains and discovered that mountains had it all over houses and trees. And as I look back on my life and think of what I like to call pivotal events, that was numero uno, because mountains have defined my life ever since. And my choice of profession, my research, my relationships, my friendships, they've all been defined by this love of these things that we all here are so hooked on.
Did your parents have a sense of that when they sent you to this camp?
I don't think so. They were both sort of couch potatoes in a sense, and I don't think they knew what they were getting in for. They may well have at times regretted what they did, but they were also very proud of their son. And, as I sat here listening to your introduction, which verged on the embarrassing, I couldn't help think that if they were sitting here, what they would think of young Tommy. And
well, you did become a doctor, so you fit that need. When you first had your first encounters with mountains, when you went to Estes Park and then you started climbing more and more, you did quite a few things in that area when you spent more time there. What was it about mountains that captured you? Do you have a sense of what appealed to you about the exploration and adventure of mountains?
Well, I don't know that there's anything probably terribly unique about that beyond just the sheer physical beauty. What I'm experiencing now in my old age, back where I met them first, of feeling like I'm living in fairy tale land. And I'm not sure I was as astute back then to that, but it was magnificent. And then, of course, there's just the individual testing and play of learning how your body works and of learning to cope with the uncertainty and controlling the fear of just simply leading rock and on places where no one's ever been and not quite sure where you're going to end up. And that's just part and parcel of what climbing is, not for everybody nowadays, but for most of the people that I see and know sitting here today, it's the same kind of stuff of learning about yourself.
Were you a natural?
Well, I don't know what a natural is. If I look at the way people climb nowadays, I'd say I was a dolt. But I was small, I was skinny, I was strong. I didn't have to think too much. It wasn't until I got old that I had to change my whole climbing style and be grateful for the climbing shoes that one wears now instead of boots, which are worth 40 or 50 years of aging. And then I had to start to really use my brain because my body was no longer the body that did everything that I asked of it.
A number of the guests who have also sat in your chair, because this is a mountain book festival, have talked about inspiration from mountain literature. Any of that in your story?
Have any of you ever read Ullman's High Conquest? Oh, isn't that fascinating? There's a couple of hands going up. I mean, this is ancient history to most of you here, but James Ramsey Ullman was a professional writer, a bit of a mountaineer, and I guess he kind of hero worshiped mountaineering and mountaineers in some way. He was also the official scribe for our Everest expedition. But he had written a history of mountaineering called High Conquest. This was written before Everest was first climbed in 1953, in my teen years of the 40s. And in it were accounts of the disasters on Nanga Parbat and the 1953 attempt by Charlie Houston, who sat in this chair some years back, and that team that first attempted to do a reconnaissance of K2 in 1938. And I never dreamed then that I would end up knowing a lot of these people who were bigger than life to me, thanks to Ullman. It was sort of a magical book to step into. But it was all fantasy. I never imagined I would ever see the Himalaya. It wasn't even an aspiration, really. And then as I got into college, into going and applying to and getting into medical school, it really sort of just dropped off the scene entirely. I was much more focused on what I wanted to do with my life as a physician and teacher and researcher.
A niggling thing in the back of your head, though, to...
Well, it was always there. And then my dear old buddy, who was, much to his dismay, 3 years younger than I, Nick Clinch, from our camping days, invited me to go to Masherbrum in 1960. And of course, that probably burst it wide open. And when I got the postcard from Deerenfurth asking if I'd be interested in going to Everest, and Willie and Dick and I made our pact. That defined things that I never would have imagined, including, I have to say, sitting here in this room right now. It's probably just as well I didn't know that at the time.
I do want to talk a bit about Masherbrum, because I think, unfortunately, a number of people have a sense of Tom as being Everest, and that's kind of the whole package. And there's a lot of other things that Tom has done before that and since. But one of the things that you've talked to me about in the last while is seeing yourself as an amateur climber. And it was a very different world then, thinking about going to the Himalaya for the first couple of times. Was the Himalaya part of the American consciousness at all at that point? Like, if you talked to people about what you were thinking about doing, would they know it? Would they get it at all?
I don't know. You know, you look at the expeditions that Charlie, the 36 Nanadevi and 38 K2 and 53, that iconic expedition.
Known by the public at that point?
No, I don't know. I think the public didn't know anything until Herzog's book Annapurna came out, and I can't speak for where the public was at. But even in mountaineering, I think it was Norman's passion that led to Everest. I don't know that there was anybody else in this country terribly thinking it was something that they wanted to do, or it was very accessible to put together an expedition. And making the expeditions happen then is a whole different ballgame than it is now. It's so easy to go there, but it was the ends of the earth back then. And the effort and the expense and the organization were pretty mind-boggling. So it was his vision and passion that let that come to pass.
When you went to Masherbrum, why that mountain?
Masherbrum is just one of the peaks up in the Karakoram near K2. Actually, its appellation is K1, but nobody knows that, and there's no reason they should. It's a little over 25,000 feet high. It had been attempted, I think, on 2 or 3 occasions by the Brits before, and one with Don Willens, and John Hunt was on one, and it proved to be a difficult mountain. And Nick, after having put together the expedition to Hidden Peak in 1958, Nick Clinch, where they succeeded in climbing one of the 14 8,000-meter peaks, the only one that Americans made a first ascent of, then got permission for Masherbrum, and he asked me to go along, partly as the doc. Climbing docs were not bouncing out of the cubicles everywhere back in those days. So, and we had climbed a little after our camp days, and that's how I think I became a part of that. He knew I was a wiry little monkey rock climber, and they thought they might need that particular attribute there. And that's not where I first met Willie and Dick, but that's where we really all came together. And I'm sure that if I hadn't been on that trip, I would have never surfaced to be invited to go on the Everest expedition.
You wrote an article about the Masherbrum expedition that was the first bit of mountain writing, I think, that I'd seen that you did. And it was interesting, you bookended that piece with a couple of things. One of them was a quote it's a lovely but horrible quote, and I'll get you to talk about it in a second here, Tom. But it begins the article, Masherbrum is a male mountain. By that, I mean it does not throw unexpected avalanches or hidden difficulties at you. Now, I need to clarify, you didn't write that, but you quoted that in there, and then you answered that at the end of the trip, answered that with a response to that from your own point of view. Can you talk a little bit about the unexpected avalanches and hidden difficulties that Masherbrum threw at you folks?
Well, you have done a hell of a lot of homework, I've got to say. I'm being nailed on my own petard, I think. In a certain sense, Masherbrum was far more quixotic and, in a way, challenging than Everest was for us. We were a small, wonderfully cohesive little team. I was the counterpoint between a little expedition like some of you guys know so well, and the Everest expedition is pretty striking. And we sensed that before we signed up for Everest, but we were just a small, cohesive group doing our thing, pushing our way up a quixotic hillside when we realized that we were sitting on this huge face of very steep snow, and it was snowing and snowing and snowing, and we thought, we better get the hell off of here. And so we started down, and as the four of us, George Bell, who had been on K2, and Willie and I and Dick McGowan, were traversing this slope, and you could barely see the next person on the rope. Suddenly this mass of stuff comes walling up and just gently pushes you off the mountainside, and you're on your way. And Willie happened to be on the edge of the slide, did a couple of cartwheels, and then got his axe in. And whereas I had been the highest on the rope before the avalanche, I was now at the bottom of the heap. And we all stopped. The avalanche went on over the cliffs. And Nick Clinch, our organizer of the expedition, was heading up below, beginning to try to figure out on his fingers how many orphans were going to be left if we had been nailed. But fortunately, I mean, we're lucky and we didn't.
Yeah. When you look back and you think about that trip in particular, and then the way that Norman Darnforth kind of saw you and some of the other people that came out of that trip, what are the characteristics that you think helped you do as well as you did on mountains of that kind of size? What do you have that other people don't necessarily have?
Well, my parents would say stubbornness. Mm-hmm. My sisters referred to me as Tom Mule. So there you have it. I've always seemed to do well at altitude, so there's probably something in the genes there, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I never regarded myself as an athlete. You know, I don't have any remarkable VO2 maxes to show off or anything like that. Just passion and determination.
And determination, yeah. Your wife, Kathy, and a couple of other of your friends as well also told me that they don't see you as having a risk gene, if that makes any sense. They don't see you as somebody who takes unnecessary risks. You're pretty calculated, you're pretty thoughtful, and one of your friends even described you as pretty scientific in your approach to taking chances on mountains. What sense do you make of that?
I've thought a lot about risk, not just because of climbing, but because of my medical profession in anesthesiology, because it's an ever-present aspect of life. And looking at the people you climb with, I sort of graded risk on this analog pain scale that we use, you know, what's your pain like from 1 or 10. And you can do that with risk too, and risk-taking. And at the 10 end of the scale are the stimulus addicts, or adrenaline junkies, or whatever you want to call them, where risk is really an essential part of the experience, I think.
And what they seek in the experience.
And seeking it, yeah. And at the other extreme, of course, are people who are risk averse and who might think being in bed is probably the safest place to be the whole time. You gravitate in climbing, I think, to teammates who have about the same risk number on that scale as you do, that you're comfortable with. And when you get people who are too far away from you, you generally look for somebody else to be a climbing partner with. Mm-hmm. The guys that I tended to climb with, Bill Sumner, Pete Schoening, and I think we sort of saw ourselves around a 6 or a 7. We had 1 or 2 that were an 8, maybe, or 9, and they were distinctly a little bit more gung-ho than I would tend to be. It's probably not very objective trying to grade your own risk-taking, so I don't know how good a job I've done. But
you have that sense of persistence and determination. Does that not kind of push you into areas of risk that might be outside of your 6 or 7?
Well, I think it can push you, and it has me. I can certainly think of examples in my professional life where I should have bailed on something, but my stubbornness of wanting to succeed just kept me persisting past the point where it was probably useful to anybody to do. Mm-hmm. That balance of that counterpoint. A few astute people have criticized Willie and me over the years for the commitment that we made in this climb on Everest. Mm-hmm. And maybe with justification, because if we hadn't succeeded, we'd be just among the bodies up there. Mm-hmm. And the response would be, those stupid asses, they should have known better. Mm-hmm. So.
But we don't often criticize the people who do succeed, right?
That's right. You made that point in Strange and Dangerous Dreams, that if you pull it off, it smells a lot better.
Yeah. May not have used those words exactly, but interesting, that idea then about finding people who are consistent with you in your approach to mountains and your risk taking and so on. That's easier to do when you're an intact core of people who invite one another, as you did on Masherbrum. But when you go to Everest, somebody else is pulling those people together and pulling people out of the ether who you may have never climbed with before, or may have never even met before. Talk about that team. How was that team formed, and how do you look back and think about the players who were involved in that trip?
Well, I think the team was fundamentally formed by Norman. And I think one of his major conditions of selecting members of the team was whatever sense he could get of their ability to be team players. Because mountaineering back in those days of expedition style climbing in the Himalaya, the goal was to get to the summit. Not to get everybody to the summit, but to get 2 people maybe to the summit. And that meant that everybody on the team knew that they might have a chance of being that person, but we're all in it together to achieve the goal. And some people do well with that and others don't. I think Norman did a remarkable job of putting together a team that had that as one of its elements beyond, the experience everybody had in different venues as mountaineers and so forth. And that may have been one of his strongest accomplishments. One he didn't do as well in 1971 on this international Everest expedition with too many prima donnas throwing eggs and rocks at each other or something. But when he was doing this, I don't think he knew that we were going to end up with 2 teams competing with each other for 2 different routes on the mountain. Mm-hmm. And that could have turned, as you can well imagine, into a real Donnybrook, except for the fact that though we could grumble, we also knew how to relate to each other, and we could compromise like our Congress doesn't seem to have, south of the border here, doesn't do these days. And there was something in it, looking back on it, that was pretty damned impressive.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that's really interesting about that trip is this idea of there were 2 separate objectives, and the balancing act between those 2, and that was to either get somebody up the normal South Col route and or put somebody up the West Ridge and then do the first traverse of the mountain. One was an objective that had already been achieved several times at that point, although there's still, when you folks left for the mountain, there still had only been 6 ascents of the peak. That's a pretty big undertaking then to see that, but you knew that one route had already been done. Mm-hmm. And in fact, on that one route, there was only 200 feet that had been unclimbed since from a long, long time earlier. Whereas what you were trying in the West Ridge, there were 2,000 unclimbed feet the last day that you and Willie went to the top. That's a pretty distinct difference.
Yeah.
In looking at the idea of the West Ridge, what did you know about the route at that point?
I didn't invent this idea of climbing it. Well, sort of maybe I did, but Norman...
He's being modest.
Norman planted the seed when he came to visit me when I was serving my time in the Navy at the Naval Hospital in San Diego. And he had already gotten the hint that the team was not terribly interested in the things he was promoting to raise money for the expedition, which was a triple slam of climbing Everest, Lhotse, and Nuptse. And nobody seemed too turned on about Nuptse, though it's a hell of a mountain. So he suggested the possibility that maybe we could go up to the top of Everest by the South Col route and then go down the West Ridge. And he had some pictures or something, maps that he showed me. And I thought about it after he left, and it seemed kind of suicidal. To get to the top of Everest, and you're sort of on your last bit of steam, and then heading off down the unknown side of the mountain, even if you had a support group somewhere down there, it still seems pretty intimidating, though it's been done. It didn't take too high an IQ to just turn it around. So the one thing that we had available was a photograph that the Indian Air Force had taken of Everest in 1953, right after the mountain was climbed, with some black and white, kind of gnarly looking photos of that side of the mountain. And you could see this little thin couloir of snow penetrating the rock for some distance before it seemed to disappear into the unknown. And I focused on that. It became a fantasy. I was in charge of the oxygen, and I could try to think about climbing steep rock at 28,000 feet with oxygen bottles, and maybe even if it's too difficult, you'd have to let your bottle down there and have a long rubber hose that would run up the same length as your rope. Some really kind of stupid ideas. But,
Your friend Bill Sumner described to me that you discovering what would eventually be termed the Hornbein couloir, and we'll talk about that in a second, was like giving a Jack Russell Terrier a bone. You just, once you got that, you were just totally focused on.
Well, I was pretty focused, and Willie in particular had another way over to the right, which wouldn't have worked as well. Hasn't yet, nobody's tried it. But anyway, they tended to refer to it as Hornbein's avalanche trap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a very, very, very different way of looking at it. And again, it's that thing of, in retrospect, you look back at it now and you think, okay, so it went. You didn't necessarily know that it would actually go as far as it did to the summit. You didn't know what the conditions were going to be like. You didn't know what the snow was going to be like. You didn't know what the safety was going to be like. So other people were referring it to either as Hornbein's avalanche trap or death trap or other things. And you really didn't really know until you got set into a high camp in there that it would be remotely possible at all to actually get up that thing.
Well, I don't think we knew until we had completed it. But that's the essence of versional climbing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And important for folks to know, too, that actually even just getting up to the West Ridge, brand new terrain, very, very different kind of climbing that would be the case heading up to the South Col, the normal kind of route. So along the way, as you're establishing what's going to happen, you've talked about kind of splitting into two separate teams. There's one team committed to the Southeast Ridge and the South Col, the other team committed to going up on the West Ridge and then eventually getting up to the couloir and up to the summit. How separate were those teams in terms of the team dynamics, the philosophy of what you were trying to do?
That's a really interesting question. I would say pretty separate. Mm-hmm. We interacted with each other a lot. There was a lot of negotiation, and there were some interesting aspects of that because Dick Emerson, with me as his chief assistant, were in charge of the logistics. In this expedition style, you've got a pyramid of camps and supplies going up the mountain. And basically, we two West Ridgers, we were the ones that were doing all of that calculation. Mm-hmm. It was Dick's framing and our hours spent, and I guess we really could have screwed our buddies, but we didn't. And it was done on parameters of 2-man teams to the top and 4-man teams to the top and all kinds of stuff that could use up a whole lot of oxygen bottles and things. But there was an element of trust in that and an element of, at times, give and take, but sometimes there was more take than give, I thought, mm-hmm. in my fanatical way. And when we came down from our reconnaissance and they had decided that the mountain had to get climbed first before we could play around on the West Ridge, I was not a happy camper, mm-hmm. but I think I behaved myself reasonably and then just went on scheming how we could just keep moving anyway. Mm-hmm. And
there's a recurring theme in your book that's quite lovely about every time Norman Darnforth would put out that this is what the objective has to be, then you'd kind of run off to your tent and sit down with pencil and paper and trying to figure out all the other ways that we could actually make that same amount of equipment be divided into two and still allow for the summit to happen.
Yeah, you're bringing back something I hadn't thought about for years, Geoff, and that is, I guess a lot of the sense of the satisfaction in accomplishing the climb was, in a way, achieving a political end as opposed to the mountaineering aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Because in that complicated dynamic with the negotiation and the give and take and the creativity of, winches and stuff, it was unique. And part of the satisfaction of the success of it all coming back, of the first American and of our traverse and climb, was that it did work. Mm-hmm. But it took a lot of interesting interaction mm-hmm. to pull it off.
Yeah. There's two quotes that I want to share with you that I think are lovely representations of what happened on that trip. One of them that Tom had written from the book is, Darnforth said that the West Ridge is just frosting on the cake, but what he didn't know is that I much prefer frosting. I mean, that to you was the heart and soul of the reason that you were there, and you had other allies in that, particularly Willie, in the idea of it's all well and good to go to the summit of Everest, but you need to go a different way to make the whole trip that we did, the leaving people behind and so on, worthy of having gone in the first place.
Well, I'm not sure that I thought of it quite that way. Okay. I was passionate to the extent that people kind of referred to me as a fanatic. But Willie, Dick, who was not thriving with the altitude, Barry Corbett and Jake Breitenbach before he was killed in Nashville, we all had the same mindset. And it was simply that The seduction was really the uncertainty, the unknown of going someplace where no one's been before. And this is not unique to many of you here. There was really no issue about being on the South Col route. We would have gone there if we'd had to go to just enable us to get the mountain climbed, which was one of the reasons why when Jim Whitaker summited on May 1st with Nawang Gambu, it was like a gift from heaven to us.
It opened up the West.
It gave us the chance to have our turn.
Yeah. I want to challenge you a little bit when you said that thing about Willie being just as committed to you, because there's a lovely audio clip where there's some conversation going back and forth again between base camp and the folks up on the West Ridge and trying to figure out, well, how do you apportion the resources? And Willie says in the audio quote, "Look, I'm in no mood to get into an argument here because I don't give a shit, so why don't you talk to Hornbein?" A lot of people on that trip give you credit for being the one that has the bone in your mouth, and you're the one that's running with it. You had the continuous kind of reserve of commitment to that, even in the face of some difficult conditions getting up there, and then particularly a terrible storm up at the Ridge Camp at West Camp 3, and still maintaining that, still focused on the capacity to go to the top and the need to go to the top.
I think I was just significantly more obnoxious, but not more impassioned with the goal. Sitting here now 50 years later and looking at, say, High and Hallowed, the film that the guys put together, Jake Norton and Dave Morton and Jim Aikman, using a lot of the footage from 50 years ago, I feel almost a little uncomfortable sort of being the target for all of this.
Mm-hmm. The target of the adulation, you mean?
And I understand that part of it is that I'm here and most of the rest of them aren't anymore. But I also feel that it's not quite imbalanced, but so be it.
You've mentioned Dick Emerson's name a couple of times. One of the really interesting things about this trip was, first of all, the intellectual level of the people on the trip. There were, I think, 3 MDs, 3 PhDs, 5 master's degrees. This is a very educated group of people. Dick was a really interesting character, though, because he was a sociologist, and he did the first real study of the psychology of how people think at altitude and taking some chances. So I want to share the audience. This is a lovely document that maybe, Tom, you can help us kind of walk through. Every day you'd be filling these things out, correct? These are diary entries that you would do?
That's correct.
Okay.
The diary was bound in blue, and it had a snap on it, and it said American Mount Everest Expedition in gold, and then your name on it. So that I know somebody tried to throw their diary in a crevasse once, and and one of our Sherpas found it and said, "Saab, you forgot this." But this is May 21st, 1963, up there in the upper left, which was the day before we went from our high camp to the summit. And I didn't take the whole diary. I just tore out the last pages, but I did do what Dick said we should be doing. I filled it out. And what you can see here is we'd gone, it's about 8:45 in the evening, and then we'd gone from 4 west to 5 west. The scale on the numbers is from +5 to -5. +5 would be, wow, and -5 would be, And you could apply it to a whole lot of things. And so +5 would be, in terms of motivation, certainty of success. And -5 would be certainty of failure. And 0 would be maximum uncertainty. Uncertainty maximizes motivation. Yeah.
Great. Have a seat. So you do that. You had mentioned before that one of the things that you were really interested in was getting up to altitude and think about rock climbing at 28,000 feet. And it's crucial to understand that what you were doing on that mountain, ascending the Hornbein Couloir and then getting onto the very top of the West Ridge and to the summit, that's probably the most technical rock climbing that had been done at that kind of altitude in history at this point. This was a very, very big deal, what you guys did.
Well, it's a very big deal, I guess, when you sit here 50 years later looking back on it. But the way I think we were perceiving it at the time is not different from what Willie had done in the Tetons and I had done in the Rockies on the things that they weren't training climbs for Everest. They were ends in themselves. Mm-hmm. It's just a different piece of real estate, and it happens to have a lot of notoriety.
Yes, the same as other things you've done, but in this particular case, fully and utterly committing, you're not going to be able to start coming back down once you go up. In fact, let me play you the clip from base camp, because this is quite I hope you guys can hear this. It's a little bit raggedy as it would be given the situations. This is a call from the mountain as you're ascending the mountain, kind of middle of the day. Do you know, is that about right?
It was the last day, and after we gotten up through the difficult rock climbing and realized that going down we thought it would be unappealing, but we play it and then I'll comment.
And this is Willie talking to Jim Whitaker.
Yeah.
I believe that's right.
Don't work yourself up into a bottleneck now, Willie. How about repelling? Is that possible? No point, Jim. So, there's nothing over for us today. And it looks like we'll be getting in pretty late. You're doing damn well, buddy. Keep it up. Over. Just hope we can.
See, uncertainty.
So you go up. Just talk a little bit about that day. What time do you leave camp that morning?
It's a little different than now. I mean, you didn't think of starting in the dark. And I don't know that we would have thought about that anyway on that unknown terrain. But we started climbing about 7. We woke up about 4 in the morning, and it took a god-awful amount of time to get our shit together, so to speak. And I started to I did put my crampons on in the tent, and Willie said, "God, Tom, you're going to poke a hole in the air mattress." And I said, "It doesn't matter, Willie. We're not coming back here anyway tonight." And the first, up to where the crux was, it was slow, steep, mixed snow and a bit of rock, and fortunately good conditions. And maybe later we can talk a little bit about how lucky we were. And then we diddled around on about a 60-foot pitch at the top of the yellow band. And once we were over that, we never said anything to each other, but we just knew where we were going. The day was beautiful. It was maybe 30 or 40 mile-an-hour winds, but a gorgeous day. The snow conditions were god-awful perfect. And we just sort of plunked along. And we didn't think much about the fact that we were supposed to be maybe met up there by Lou Jerstad and Barry Bishop coming up the other side and wondering whether we were going to get there in time or not. We just went for it. Mm-hmm. And it was a blast. I mean, we were having fun watching the mystery unfold, and the last little scrambling on rock just below the summit with drops off on either side like that for thousands of feet was magical. Not difficult climbing, but you're a long way from home.
Mm-hmm. Before you go too far into kind of over-modesting what it is that you did, I just want to give some context of this. As of just a few days ago, the numbers are as recent as we can get them. Everest has 6,208 ascents, 3,877 via the Southwest Ridge, and there have been 249 deaths on the mountain so far. The West Ridge that Tom and Willie climbed has had 14 ascents and has had 16 deaths. So after all these years, this few people have climbed this route. I know there's lots of other reasons why the numbers are so much higher on the other routes, because of the ease of going there now, the facilitation of the experience and so on. But it's still, to this day, it's a huge, huge thing. It's not that the West Ridge has only been attempted 14 times. There have been multiple attempts on that aren't captured in how many people have actually made it to the summit. This was a big deal. And you were doing it with, what kind of rope at that point?
Oh, good goal line.
Good goal line. Yeah, so
how many of you know what goal line is?
No harnesses at this point. So there's a gold line tied around your waist as you're doing this.
Yeah.
What are you carrying for gear, for protection?
Oh, we had a few rock pitons.
A few meaning how many?
Oh, I don't know, a half dozen.
For 2,000 feet of climbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then you get to the top. That's only part of the journey, as we know. What time do you get there?
6:15.
6:15. How long do you stay?
Oh, 20 minutes. maybe.
And do you know that your colleagues have been there earlier in the day? They got there around 3:50.
Yeah, we could see their crampon tracks and ice axe holes in the snow, so we knew they had been there.
And if you were to take a look at this kind of scale, I don't know if you filled out a diary for this day as well, but if you took a look at apprehension and concern and so on, when you and Willie are standing there at the top and the sun is starting to go down, where are you on the scale then?
Well, first of all, I should tell you where I was on the mountain then, and confess I never thought about it before just now, but my failure to fill out the diary that night.
You were busy.
No, we weren't doing a damn thing. We were just, we went down and it got dark and we eventually met up with Lute and Barry, who were kind of wasted, and we just got to a point where we didn't know where to go next, and we had to curl up on our packs and shiver the night away.
No sleeping bags?
No.
No water? No food?
No, just starlight. And some heat lightning flashing out on the plains off in the distance beyond Lhotse to tell you there was a world of warmth and flat. But you could look up at the ridge of Everest sort of disappearing into the darkness, and it was like the stars seemed kind of unshimmering, but it was like being in this little spot in almost in outer space, and in a strange space, really. We were all curled up in our own thoughts, and I never even thought about filling out the diary.
Well, you also didn't have headlamps either, did you?
I didn't have it. I couldn't have done it even if our headlines, such as they were, the batteries were, which didn't tolerate cold well and didn't tolerate all the weeks they'd already been filling out the diary, that they were kaput when we started down from the summit as it got.
You have a beautiful sentence in the book that's a fantastic summary of what the odds were that night, and that's simply to say, if the wind hadn't died down, we would have. Because it became, for the first time that day, it became windless.
I think we were very, very lucky, and that's not to diminish the commitment and all that stuff, but there have been about 60 attempts on Everest since then. I think 6 successful ascents of the route, with about 14 that have summited by that couloir. And it wasn't until I looked at Liz Hawley's database that, as I started to write this and look at it, that I really appreciated what the odds are like and how fortunate we were. One example, of course, is this bivouac. If there had been a wind that night, I wouldn't be sitting here bullshitting with you. Another is that a few days before we actually made our final push, Willie and I went out to the base of what's called the Hornbein couloir now, and it was a blustery day with low visibility, and we came back to our tent, and there were 2 more with Barry Corbin and Al Lawton and 5 of our Sherpas ready for the final push. And then at night, a big wind came up and blew those tents, fortunately not all the way off the mountain, but we thought we were finished. But as we had been coming back across the slabs of snow, they were going woomph, woomph, woomph. And when we went back up 3 or 4 days later for the final push, no woomphing anymore. That wind had really scoured the mountain. And if Hornbein's avalanche trap really was an avalanche trap, we were just plunking our feet, sometimes knee deep, but there was no issue. And I think that all these attempts that have failed, sometimes the people run out of gas, but sometimes it's the weather, the wind. That place where the tents blew away may well be the windiest spot on the mountain, which was why it had such a wonderful surface to put a tent on. To go up there and back then with all of the unknown and the naivety and just do it, looking back on it from the experience since, for better and worse, and I would say maybe better, we didn't have to know all that back then.
And if there was luck involved, you were the luckiest of all. You actually kept fingers and toes as well, which wasn't the case for anybody else who spent the night out with you that night. Why do you think that was? What do you think you did different? Especially knowing from a kind of a mountain physiology point of view.
There are a couple of things that I know I did different. One is my feet started getting cold, and grumbling and grousing, I took my crampons off and loosened my boots, my reindeer fur boots. Willie, whose feet had been cold all day, as he told me in retrospect, he said, "No, Tom, my feet are fine." And the cold feet of all day that we weren't smart enough to figure out had turned numb. But the other 3 had their crampons with the boots of that era. So I think the crampons are just a wonderful conductor of cold. Lute didn't lose any of his digits for some reason, even so, but Barry and Willie. Willie's got this little jar, or I should say his widow Jolene and the kids, of 9 nubbies that the kids like to bring out after dinner parties before dessert, because they got a lot more desserts that way.
Okay, I got more out of you about Everest than I promised you that I would ask you about, but I want to turn to post-Everest, because it certainly wasn't the case that was your entire life, that there was a lot after that, particularly in terms of medicine. But I want to focus on one thing first, and that's, you did mention you were gone for a long time and that you left a lot behind. One of the things that you and I had spoken about is that whole life of adventure, when you go for that long particularly, can be pretty hard on the people that are left at home. What was kind of the aftermath for you and your colleagues of having gone to Everest, in terms of family, in terms of moving forward? There was some fame attached to having climbed the mountains. What was it like for you afterwards?
I think we're about to leave advanced space in the Coombe and head out into the unknown here, but a little bit of uncertainty. I've lost track of the numbers, but when we all got back, there were quite a number of divorces, 1 or 2 marriages. So clearly, for many of us, that expedition was sort of a tipping point in other respects. And my marriage ended 5 years later. If Everest was the tipping point, the reasons for it, Jean and I, really much predated that, as the case in life in general.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of change. And
was it a turning point for you? Did it reframe something about yourself, or what you wanted?
Well, one of the things I knew when I left Everest was that I was never going back there.
To Everest or to the Himalaya?
To Everest. And sort of it's been to Nepal, but it was mainly Everest. And there were 2 reasons for it then. One was the experience in all of its facets was so unique that it was non-replicable. And I know going back, each experience is unique, but I couldn't see trying to revisit the past.
Did you imagine being disappointed if you saw what happened?
Yeah, I think I might have. And the other reason, though, which may have been more compelling, was I was really just starting my academic career. And I was loaded with lots of uncertainty in terms of my ability as a doc, a teacher, a researcher, et cetera. That whole adventure was yet ahead. And I really wanted to just stuff Everest into a box and forget about it. I couldn't, but I was able for...
Couldn't because other people wouldn't let you, or?
Right, I mean, yeah. But I was able to be pretty schizophrenic for a long time and keep that over here and just drive my career the way I wanted it to go as best I could. And one of the most refreshing things that would happen would be when one of my faculty or residents would discover, years after they'd known me in my professional capacity, discovering that I had climbed Everest. And what was so nice about that was to realize that my relationship with them didn't have that influencing their assessment. They were judging me on my capacities in our interaction together. And those occasions when that would happen were always, and still are, really nice.
Yeah. One of the things that was really interesting for me to hear from some of your medical colleagues who also know you're climbing, some of them climbers themselves, is they said, however famous Tom is in the mountain world for Everest, he's far more famous in the medical world for his research, which I thought was a very telling thing about the way you're respected there.
That's very nice. I'm not sure it's true, but you take whatever the reality is. But I had a very fulfilling professional life. And I guess looking back on it now and seeing some of the people that trained in our program and what they're doing with their own lives, and realizing that I was part of helping that to happen, it's wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I want to talk about your work in altitude medicine and hypoxia. What do we understand now that we didn't, or you didn't know back in 1963? Have things changed that much? Are we that much further along in our understanding of altitude?
Oh yes, very much in certain ways. But if you ask how much that understanding really applies to how people fare on Everest now, I would say that most of what we've learned really has come from just the experience of people being there. And if you simply look at the numbers of people that are going there and being moved up and down the mountain with an outcome in terms of mortality that has not increased with the increasing numbers, you would think statistically, for example, going through the icefall, that with more pins to be bowled down, the mortality might go up, but it hasn't. And it's the whole thing is now sort of programmed in a remarkable way to move fairly large numbers of people up there, too large numbers, one might say, and do it with, so far, modicum safety and facility, but I do worry about it. But that's all due to just pushing back the barriers of the unknown in terms of how people perform at altitude. And when we climbed Everest, we used oxygen. We had a discussion about maybe not on the Southeast Ridge, and that was, but...
what did you think as a physician at that point? Did you guess that it would be possible to do it without oxygen?
Well, I don't know that I had any superior wisdom, but I sort of knew it could be done without oxygen. The thing I wasn't sure of is whether logistically, with the increased time it might take, and that, but I knew physiologically it could. How did I know that? Well, partly from Charlie Houston's Operation Everest I chamber study back that was published in '46, where he took naval volunteers and put them in a chamber and acclimatized them over 40 some odd days to the top of Everest and watched them acclimatize and function. So I was pretty sure that what Reinhold Messner and Peter Hoppler did 15 years later was going to happen at some point. I have to say, not everybody would have agreed with me back then.
Do you get a sense that oxygenless ascents of Everest are out of the scope of most people, or what's allowing those people who are able to do that to do?
That's a really interesting question, and we don't really... I think that oxygenless ascents are probably within the scope of more people than we know, but not by any means everybody. And it may well be that the majority can't. I would be pretty damn sure there were people on our expedition that could have done it without using oxygen, because we were genetically probably not a different breed than those that are doing it now.
Are you one of them, do you think? Knowing how you acclimatize? And
well, I wouldn't be surprised. And it might have made climbing that 60-foot step without oxygen. I don't know. That would have been challenging without oxygen, I think.
Is there even a touch of regret in the back of your mind that you used it?
You know, when I first met Charlie Houston, who I'd read about in High Conquest, it was when we came back to Delhi from Everest, and John Kenneth Galbraith, who was the American ambassador in India, had this nice lunch for us around his swimming pool, and Charlie really grilled me about the climb, and he extolled how wonderful it was. And then there was this little note of, wouldn't it have been nice if you could have done it without? And I have to agree, that would have been nice. But it was not where, as things evolve and become more certain, then you define new flavors to maintain uncertainty. And of course, eventually, oxygenless ascents, winter ascents, and et cetera. It's just a natural evolution of what mountaineering is, and any endeavor in life, really. Mountains are, for me, just a great big hairy metaphor for what the rest of existence is all about.
But you've been pretty well served by having climbed Everest, and particularly at the time that you did it, and it's brought you a number of things in your life. But one of the interesting things you said to me too was that you were really glad that you weren't the first American to have climbed it. What did you mean by that?
Well, Jim was the first American, and Jim, I think for him that was very important.
To be first.
To be first. For those of us on the West Ridge, we had discussions where we would frame it, if you knew that we weren't going to get to the top, would you still be interested in attempting to climb the West Ridge? And Emerson allowed us how, he would still be interested. Willie and I didn't quite trust that, but we didn't know that. And so we thought, well, maybe we can pull it off. But we knew we preferred that to the other, to being the first American. The idea of having to come back and sort of carry that mantle with the public, it could have been very distracting, and I would have done a lousy job of it, I think. And Jim did a wonderful job with it. It related to what he was doing professionally, running REI, and to who he was. And he took a lot of the heat, I think, off of me and Willie.
And so being the fourth or the fifth, I don't think you've ever declared which of the two of you got to the top first that day, but being the fourth or the fifth kind of allowed you to do the other things you've done in your life as well to a much probably greater degree with less distraction or other kind of pressures.
Yeah, I think Jim freed us up, at least freed me up to just get on with the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I thank him for it.
Yeah. Well, let's finish with that. I've got 1,000 other things to ask you about, but we do have to finish
we'll
up
talk
here.
fast.
What's it mountain life like for you these days? What do you do? What's your interaction with mountains these days?
Well, they're part of my soul. And I live in them, and I breathe from them. And I wander up the slabs behind our house on Lumpy Ridge and look at the Front Range out there, and I feel like it's magic. We live in a very simple environment compared to living in a city, but we have a community of very close friends, the kinds of friends who, when someone among us has troubles, they all circle the wagons. It couldn't be much better.
Yeah. Thank you. Tom Hornbein.
It's incredible to think about how much Dr. Hornbein has contributed to the world of high-altitude medicine. We hope you enjoyed this interview. Join the festivities and help us celebrate 50 years of adventure stories at the heart of the festival here in Banff. Check out our website at banffmountainfestival.ca. This episode was produced by Anique C. and is a production of Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. The theme music was composed by Jacques Blackstone. A special thanks to our audio engineer Ben Ewing and the production team at Banff Centre, as well as the folks from the Paul D. Fleck Library.